And welcome back. Hi everyone, David Cross with you again. And in this series of videos, or this video, I think I might finish the quick start with this. But in this video, I want to concentrate on two of the tools and policies in templates. Um, Two of the templates specifically that enable you to automate the provisioning of IP addresses within a new subnet, or the provisioning of multiple subnets that you might want to organize in a site. So meaning if you have a site that you always want a certain number of subnets and management, loopback, things like that, you can create a template that will do that. So kind of to start with, we look at the IP addresses within each subnet and give you an option to create templates. And these templates then, when you create the subnet, if selected, will automatically assign whatever IP addresses, statically, dynamically, reserved, other status, based on how you've defined them in the template. So what we have, and I have two here already defined, that we can go in and begin to understand how the addresses look. So the idea and concept of this template is you'll select your version, v4, v6, and that each allocation gives you the ability to define a pool, which is a contiguous range of IP addresses, or to create individual IP addresses that can span multiple IPs. So in terms of, say, like a dynamic pool, DACP, I might create a start-end offset like I have. And what we're looking at is the offset of the usable IP address in terms of its count. So if you think about a /24, you have 254 usable IP addresses, 0 in the 255, so 256 are used. So out of 254, the IP addresses then are 1 to 254. So if I wanted to have a dynamic pool that started at IP address 100 from the beginning of the subnet, I could then say I want it to end at 10 IP addresses from the end of the subnet count, counting backwards from 254. Or I could say I want it to end at 250 starting from the beginning of the subnet. From a device type, and when you're looking at pools, you can define what type of devices you're anticipating using this pool. So with the device type also comes the naming policies if you apply those or are applied for the pool. And then from an individual object perspective, this might be a way that you would assign at the first IP address, and also ending at the first IP address is going to be the router. You can also specify that this is going to be the default gateway so that when the router is added, it will also set the policy default gateway to this IP, which can then be inherited by those DACP options. So might be a good thing to have if you're not running the Discover to do the imports. And I'm going to come back and explain that. So here we have, if I wanted to assign just the router, telling us the first IP is the router. It's statically assigned. We can create resource records if we had domains or anything along those lines. Okay, so that's kind of the concept of the template. And I'm going to actually delete this. And just to quickly explain why, with the templates, if I were to allocate the IP address for the router, which I would expect to be the first IP in the subnet, if I could then go out and discover that information, because the IP is already assigned, the router will not link itself to that assigned IP. It's trying to insert a special type called interface, and it can't do that if it's already allocated. So we leave it off if we're going to discover and fill the router data in automatically, or you add it if you are comfortable that you're not going to run a router discover to attach the interface or those things. So we can do it either way. I'm filling in the IP, so I want to go ahead and omit the router so it fills in automatically. Now you can do the same thing with different size subnets, and obviously recommended. You might want to name it something that tells it it's a /23 subnet using a hyphen or something along those lines. And then you would have, of course, different types of ending offsets based on that size, so that you'll go in this address, you'll have 512 usable, and our pools will start at 350 in the second range and end at 5 from the end of the subnet. So as you get into these larger size subnets, you're going to, of course, might need some calculators to get those sizes and offset correct. But Should be very clear here that you can do this based on the offset of the IP. And just as an example of applying that template, and this is typically done in a manual method, I might then go into Georgia, and let's just go into this site here and do add child block. And when I do that, actually, we wanted to do, add child block. I'm going to let it manually grab the next available, but in the allocation template, I'm going to go ahead and grab a 24. So this is going to take the next available, and I can see that the next is 3.0 in this range. I can give it some other information, or it'll fill these in dynamically. The block description, I could go ahead and say this is a new block to demonstrate allocation templates. And I don't need the primary subnet and others. I could go in and fill in the VLAN, so I could say this is VLAN 1213, and I'll show you that why later in David Cross. And then I could fill in some other things here as well. So if I, wanted to look at, addresses here, I could fill in some drop downs from my states. So if you wanted to populate a different drop down for certain attributes and user-defined fields, you can. I could do, this right here. Now the Google Maps, when I save this information, will inherit these fields to effectively create a dynamic link that should show me that when I open it. And because I'm selecting this, then that I can go ahead and define, here's my DHCP server that I want to be used for that dynamic pool, and go ahead and create those. Now in that subnet, just kind of as a quick view, you'll see here's our reserved range that we've allocated, and here's our DHCP, and nothing else is in this particular view. So at that point, if I were to go in then and discover the router, or someone goes out and provisions a router, I can then discover that, and it'll fill in its IP addresses automatically as it's done up here in this particular subnets here. So that's what I was looking for, was this interface, and when I discover that subnet, that's how that will insert it. And that's and also because you omitted it from the template. Right? So that's one of the templates, and this works out very well. And if let's say you have an empty subnet, you don't have to have one there. We'll just go ahead and make this empty. You can later go in if it's an empty subnet and there's no addresses that are conflicting with any of those addresses in the range, and you can apply those templates post creation. So you can still go down and say allocate a 24, go ahead and define it after it's been allocated. Now in this particular case, I must have selected one that I had already created the addresses. Yes, I did. Okay, this is the one I wanted to use. So as you saw, it does have conflict detection, which I was obviously conflicting with what's in the system. And here we'll try this one again and save this. This one should work, which it did. And then if I look at the view, it'll have applied the template. And now both of my subnets have that same template. Okay, and that's how the allocation scheme works. And you can do this with different, again, size subnets and different methods. Now the other template that I'm looking at here is what we call site templates. And the site template allows you to define any number of subnets, 1 through whatever's available. And within each of those templates, we can then say within the subnets, other parameters that might define how it's going to be used, its current status, and here we can also say if it was a subnet, its allocation scheme. Well, what I effectively have is I've created basically a hierarchy of templates that I'm going to use. So I have a template that when I go out and create a new region, I'm going to apply a new template that'll get the first aggregate block. I can then create a state template, which will give me the next one, and then a third, which will give me the sites. And I have this predetermined plan for each of these sites that I want to mimic effectively one of these others. So let me show you what we have. So I wanted to effectively mimic this, that I'm going to have these various block types aggregated at the state level. I'm going to reserve video for future. And as I get down into the subnets, I then want this type of subnet in my template, and it's going to create each of these as I'm looking at the information. Now, one thing is if your display is getting a little crunched together, you can check the columns and deselect the fixed header, and that will expand that header for you a little. So this is what I wanted to mimic. I want a data block of a /24. I want two management interfaces, a /30 for the serial pair, a 29 for other types of sniffers and network equipment. Then I have a VoIP block, which is dedicated to a 10 range, basically, and then a wireless range. And what I basically am doing then is at the region level, I have a template that'll create the aggregate 16, and we're going to call this the private 10. Then at the state level, I have a template that'll create these aggregates for each type. And then at the state level, I'm going to create a template that actually creates the subnets. And that's how I've modeled that to work here. So to review that, then, if we start at the very top region, there is my private block. And within this block, I'm not doing much at all. I'm just saying this is a /16. I could go in and say exclude it from discovery or do some other settings here, but I really don't. I just want the /16 that I'm going to create all of the other blocks from for the region. At the site or state aggregate, then, this is where I'm going to start to break it down by its types. And as I do this with data management, each one having different variables, and these are going to be aggregate ranges that I'm going to take my subnets from at the state level. And I'm going to show you how that works there too. And this goes all the way down into your DHCP and others. And I'm also, in some cases, where we could also set up any of the templates that we were using down at the subnet level. So here's the aggregate. And then when I get down to the site level, we're going to get into data. And as you can see, I can do the private subnet 24 allocation templates, and that will then pre-allocate those ranges and pools for me. I would also, at these levels, go ahead and set up any of the policies as much as I could for these subnets that would be consistent. Okay. And now with the site template, and again, you can have varying size subnets, varying size templates. And with that site, the idea in concept is you would go into a new site and you would say add site, and it would create those subnets for you. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of back up. I need to add another region basically, and I'm going to show you another concept here to do this too under container maintenance. So what I want to do is I want to create basically a new container. I want this to be central. Or let's do west. And we'll do west region. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. Let's go ahead and refresh this so you can see this. And you'll see here that we now have a template called west. Now what I also want to do is I want to basically clone these other two templates. And let's say here we're going to have this out in California. And we're going to leave everything else the same because it's pretty much the same template that I want. But what I'm going to do after I do this is I'm going to reparent it. And I'm going to move it down to west. Okay, so that's now taken care of. And then the last thing I want to do is clone the state, and its site. So I might say this is, just to keep it consistent, everything I've done, name yours accordingly. We'll go ahead and save this, refresh it, and then I'm going to move that again to the new container. And this time I'll put it under California. Okay. So what we've done is we've effectively have copied all of the predetermined templates the way that we're going to use them because each of these are consistently the same. So what we want to do then is I want to go in and add my site, and I'm going to add the region aggregate and just click submit. IPControl is going to get the next available one as we see there. I'll then go down into the California. We're going to select state aggregate, and here I could do other things like the type of allocation reason or give us some other details. And then lastly, when I get down into my subnets, I'm going to do add site. And this one has a few different policies that allow me to set up the allocation templates, which I could change and modify, or just assume everything from there. And that's it. And so if you look at all the allocations there, we've effectively aggregated the site. And from that particular block size, we've created down all the regions. And you'll see here kind of how those are allocated. And we can take a look at the California range and see what our free space is. And this will give us a good indicator of when we need to expand more aggregation space so that we can fulfill the subnet allocations, and then showing you reserve state and other type views from this area. And then over time, as you start collecting your utilization and things, you'll start seeing that detail fill in, and we can start doing the global utilization roll-ups every day, collecting DHCP, DNS, IP addresses, and so forth. So I want to, kind of cut it at that and leave that part of the video here. And I think I'm going to go ahead and close off this quick start series because I think I've given you enough information that you can kind of go back now and model your data and see how that fits so that you can try and duplicate or automate as much as possible. And then in my next series of videos, I plan to expand this and open up the CLIs with a command line interface. And I also want to open up to APIs, show you where you can do some of these things like applying a new site template, creating new containers, or things programmatically as you need new sites, wherein we were cloning, you might want to duplicate that through a script to automate it. As one example. So I want to thank you for your patience with my series of videos on this first set. I hope it's been helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those comments to me privately, or you have my email as you've seen in these. So you can send them to me, through my email address, and we'll take care of those questions for you. All right, thank you. Take care, and I hope to see you all in the next series of videos. And if you have any suggestions or comments, please let me know. Take care.